Let's jump right into today's explainer. We're unpacking what is, frankly, the ultimate sporting contradiction. We're looking at why a race that fails almost every single modern metric is still universally revered as motorsport's undisputed crown jewel. I mean, think about it. Take a map of the Principality of Monaco and try to design a motor racing circuit on it. You literally can't. There's just no room. It's this tiny crescent of rock and concrete where every square meter is already occupied. There's nowhere to put a grandstand, it doesn't block someone's balcony, and absolutely nowhere to put a runoff area for safety. Yet, for almost a century, the fastest cars on Earth have raced here. It is, without a doubt, motorsport's ultimate paradox. Because look at the reality here. By every rational measure, the Monaco Grand Prix is a completely flawed and broken track. Every argument against it? Yeah, it's pretty much true. The streets are exactly the same width they were back in 1929, carriage widths, basically, which means they are just way too narrow for modern Formula One cars. Overtaking is essentially impossible, which turns the races into these high-speed processions. And safety? The circuit totally fails modern safety standards. It only survives because the sport's governing body grants it a permanent exemption. But, and here's the kicker, ask any driver on Earth which single race they would choose to win, and the answer is always, without fail, Monaco. Winning here brings a currency that outlasts any career. It brings pure legend. It's the core contradiction at the heart of the world's most famous motor race. Now, this madness really starts with the circuit's extreme geography. A single lap here demands the entire range of a driver's skills, packed into a little over 3 kilometers. And get this, it features the absolute slowest corner in all of Formula One. It literally forces these modern aerodynamic spaceships to crawl through the famous Fairmont hairpin at a mere 30 miles per hour. That's neighborhood traffic speed. The drivers have to wind the steering wheel completely on, and seeing a multi-million-dollar thoroughbred F1 car moving that slowly, it's one of the most enduring, absurd images of Monaco. The cars just look way too big for the streets, like giants forced to perform in a space built for something else entirely. But then, right after crawling through that hairpin, just seconds later, they plunge into a pitch-black tunnel and hit a terrifying 160 miles per hour on a blind curve. I mean, the extreme sensory shift here is just jarring. You go from glaring Mediterranean sunlight into artificial gloom, with the scream of the engines bouncing off the tight walls to create this physical wall of noise. And then, they burst right back out into the daylight and have to brake incredibly hard for a chicane. Having the absolute slowest corner and one of the fastest, most disorienting sections within seconds of each other, that is exactly why this track demands total, unbroken concentration. So, how did this all start? Well, to understand the madness, we actually need to rewind to 1929. It all began with a problem that money couldn't solve: a lack of respect. The Automobile Club de Monaco wanted full international status, right? But they kept getting rejected because their famous Monte Carlo rally didn't technically take place on Monegasque soil. It just finished there. So Anthony Noge proposed this crazy idea of racing on these narrow streets, simply to win international motorsport respect for the tiny principality. He got the crucial blessing of Prince Louis II, who is all for anything that raised Monaco's profile, and they just closed the public roads and birthed this impossible race. That very first race, back on April 14th, 1929, was an invitation-only affair. They raced under Formula Libre rules, which basically meant almost anything goes, allowing all these wildly different machines to compete against each other. The very first winner was a guy racing under the fake name Williams. His real name was William Grover Williams, an Anglo-French driver piloting a Bugatti painted in British racing green. He drove a brilliantly controlled race, but honestly, what's truly astonishing is what happened to him later. When World War II broke out, Grover Williams became a secret agent for Britain's Special Operations Executive. He actually organized resistance networks in France before tragically being caught by the Gestapo. Knowing that the first Monaco winner met such a dark, incredibly heroic fate just adds this heavy, amazing layer of historical resonance to the track. And the fundamental bargain established on that very first afternoon? It remains exactly the same today. It's a trade-off: extraordinary spectacle and glamour, exchanged for extraordinary, completely unyielding risk. It created a template that we still see every single May. You've got a race run on closed public roads right in the heart of a glamorous town where the cars pass close enough to literally touch the barriers. A single mistake doesn't mean spinning safely into a gravel trap, it means hitting a solid wall. Monaco immediately became the most glamorous motor race in the world, making it crystal clear from day one that this circuit rewards absolute precision and ruthlessly punishes bravado. Because of that unyielding risk, Monaco only ever flatters the finest drivers. It's not just about who has the fastest car. Guys like Ayrton Senna, Graham Hill, and Michael Schumacher, they mastered the relentless, punishing mental exhaustion of threading that needle for 78 laps. Take Graham Hill, for example. He was so dominant in the 1960s, they literally nicknamed him Mr. Monaco. He totally understood that you don't win here with one heroic lap. You win through the patient accumulation of flawless, error-free driving. And then, of course, there's Ayrton Senna, who pushed that mastery to an entirely different, almost supernatural level, earning the ultimate title, King of Monaco, with an unmatched 6 victories. Speaking of Senna, let's talk about his 1988 qualifying lap, because he literally entered a trance-like state. He went faster, and then faster still, until he beat his teammate Alain Prost, who, remember, was driving the exact same car, by over a full second. Now, in Formula One, a gap of over a second between identical cars is practically incomprehensible. Senna later described driving on pure instinct, pushing so far beyond human limits that he actually terrified himself and had to just back off. It was this rare glimpse into a bizarre psychological territory that only the absolute greatest drivers ever reach. And honestly, it's perfectly fitting that it happened at Monaco, the one track that demands more from a driver's concentration than anywhere else on Earth. Now, because passing is practically impossible here, superior pace simply isn't enough to guarantee a win. A perfect example of this is the 1992 race. Nigel Mansell was totally dominating in a vastly superior car, but a late pit stop dropped him just behind Senna. So you have Mansell on fresh tires in a much faster car throwing absolutely everything at Senna in those closing laps. But Senna, he used the narrow streets as a weapon. He flawlessly blocked every single racing line, lap after agonizing lap, defending with this miraculous coolness under pressure. He won by simply holding back the faster car, proving that at Monaco, the track gives the defending driver a weapon you don't get anywhere else, the brutal reality that there is just nowhere to pass. But we have to acknowledge that all this glamour has always come with a very dark price. Back in 1955, Alberto Ascari miraculously survived after literally plunging his car directly into the Mediterranean harbor. But then, in 1967, Lorenzo Bandini suffered a horrific, fatal fire, which was actually fueled by the straw bales they used to line the track with. That forced the sport to stop ignoring the casual danger of street racing. Later, in 1994, Karl Wendelinger's near-fatal crash at the chicane really accelerated modern safety standards. The problem is, Monaco has always been a complete nightmare for safety reformers because you just cannot build runoff areas. The buildings and the sea are sitting exactly where they were a century ago. The danger is literally right there, inches from the cockpit. And that relentless pressure of the walls doesn't just cause tragedies. It can completely scramble a race. The mental load of driving this track without a single second of rest means drivers operate at the absolute ragged edge of their physical and mechanical limits. And when you mix that with rain, well, in 1982, when rain started falling in the closing laps, that lack of margin led to what is arguably the single most absurd finish in F1 history. The circuit simply began to devour the leaders one by one. Let me walk you through this because it's unbelievable. In the final 3 laps, utter chaos breaks loose. First, the leader, Alain Prost, crashes into the barriers. Riccardo Patrese inherits the lead, but almost immediately spins out and stalls his car. So then Didier Pironi takes the lead, but his car literally runs out of gas and coasts to a halt. Then Andrea de Ceres takes over, and guess what? He too runs out of fuel. Meanwhile, Patrese, who is stranded on the track, uses the downhill slope to miraculously bump start his stalled car, rejoins the race, and steals the win. It was a concentrated, wild dose of Monaco's cruelty, proving that on these streets, nothing is ever truly decided until that checkered flag actually falls. So because it is so hard to pass during the race, qualifying on Saturday is essentially the main event. And this absolute premium on qualifying drove even a legend like Michael Schumacher to intentional cheating back in 2006. Sitting on provisional pole, Schumacher saw his rival Fernando Alonso flying on a faster lap. In a moment of sheer desperation, Schumacher deliberately locked his brakes and parked his Ferrari right across the exit of the Rascasse corner. It's still hard to believe a multi-time world champion would resort to this. By parking there, he forced yellow flags, making Alonso slow down and completely ruining his lap. The stewards, of course, saw right through it and sent Schumacher straight to the back of the grid. It just goes to show how Monaco's intense obsession with track position can drive even the greatest champions to totally disgrace themselves. Today, however, Monaco is facing a very real existential crisis, the procession problem. Over the decades, Formula One cars have grown into these massive, long, wide spaceships. But the streets of Monaco? They haven't changed. They are exactly the same width they were in 1929. The cars have literally, physically outgrown the track. Through tight sections like the swimming pool complex, having two modern cars race side by side is geometrically impossible. There is simply nowhere for a second car to exist. Because of this, the racing has largely turned into a parade, where the pole sitter just leads the field around for an entire afternoon, unable to be passed, even by much faster cars trailing right behind them. The racing became such a predictable procession that by 2025, officials desperately mandated a brand new rule. Every single driver had to make 2 pit stops, regardless of their tire conditions. This was a pretty blatant attempt to inject strategic chaos by forcing positions changes in the pit lane simply because they couldn't happen out on the track. Lando Norris ended up winning that race, but the general verdict was that the rule just made the event more about sheer luck rather than making it genuinely competitive. I mean, when a sport has to artificially force pit stops just to manufacture passing, you really have to ask yourself if the on-track product is fundamentally broken. So the argument over Monaco ultimately comes down to this massive clash between logic and emotion. If you look at the rational arguments against it, they're overwhelming, right? There is zero overtaking, it fails safety metrics left and right, and the drama often has to be artificially manufactured. But the emotional and historical arguments in favor, they are entirely irreplaceable. Monaco is still the supreme test of precision. That qualifying lap on Saturday is easily the most thrilling spectacle in motorsport, and it deeply connects the sport to its origins. Honestly, Monaco isn't on the calendar because it produces the best racing, it is on the calendar because it produces the most meaning. And you just can't quantify that kind of emotion. Just look at Charles Leclerc in 2024. Born and raised right there in Monaco, he had suffered through years of brutal bad luck, crashes, and total heartbreak at his home race. But in 2024, he secured pole and led flawlessly all the way to the finish, becoming the first Monegasque winner since 1931. Now, by every cold statistical sporting measure, the race itself was a boring procession, but emotionally, it was a deeply moving human triumph that brought a hometown hero to tears. No purpose-built, highly engineered modern track could ever generate that feeling, because that feeling comes directly from the history and the sheer weight of Monaco itself. Which leaves us with this final thought. Monaco is really an act of magnificent defiance against common sense and modernization. Its impracticality is exactly the source of its romance. So if we wipe Monaco off the map to replace it with a perfectly fair, perfectly safe, sterile, modern track with tons of overtaking, do we lose the very soul of the sport in the process? The greatest drivers in the world still say this is the one race they dream of winning. And as long as they believe in the legend, the crown jewel will endure. Thanks for joining me for this explainer. I hope it sparked your curiosity about this beautiful, broken race. So what do you think? Should sports prioritize perfect fairness or irreplaceable history?